progress, it makes me think, what were we doing for 9 years? Why was it so bad for so long? What were we doing?
You know, as a private citizen, I'd written about this, visited 3 times on my own, and had raised a lot of these questions, particularly the one you raised. But I have to tell you honestly, Rachel, nothing prepared me and my colleagues for what we inherited in areas like this. Another example in the same field, literacy. We were training police who were not literate, churning them out. Why were we doing that? How can a policeman be unable to even read an ID card? So one of the first things we did was to insist that policemen have mandatory literacy training. Now, they're only getting 64 hours. I don't think the course is as long as we'd be comfortable with. General Caldwell and General McDonald and their colleagues are working on this intensively, and we're supporting them. But the question of why things happened the way they happened is very difficult to answer. People in the previous administration, many of whom are friends of mine and former colleagues, when you ask them about this, they almost always say Iraq diverted us. Mm-hmm. It's ironic because in the campaign in 2008, that was exactly what the senior Democratic candidates in the race, one of whom is now president, another's the vice president, the third is my boss, the Secretary of State, they kept saying, we're taking our eye off the ball in Afghanistan. And it turned out to be more serious than we expected. So the process of fixing things has been expensive and time-consuming. But, and this is the key point, we're in Afghanistan because it really matters. We're in Afghanistan because if we fail in Afghanistan, it will have a direct, immediate danger to us. It will increase al-Qaeda's worldwide reach. They will come back with the Taliban in all likelihood, and they will gain a worldwide success, which will be very dangerous for our national security interests. So we have to be clear. The American public needs to be clear on why we're in Afghanistan. This is not Vietnam, a war which I participated in as a State Department civilian in the Lower Mekong Delta when I entered the government. This is not the Balkans. It's not Iraq. This is quite different. This one relates directly to our safety at home. And so you've picked out the number one weak link in our chain. And luckily for us, so has this administration, starting with the team you and I have mentioned, David Petraeus, Bill Caldwell, General McDonald, and other people through the chain of command. We're really focused on the police. I can also tell you that in the policy review last fall, which President Obama personally conducted, which was the most intense policy review I've ever been involved in, we spent more time on the issue of police and Army training than any other single issue. So we were so focused on its importance.
I think the question strategically has been, well, what can we do in year 10 that we couldn't do in years 1 through 9? And having gone there, I feel like the nuance or the sort of deeper part of that question that I still have now is about how we counteract the negative effect of the time we have spent there. It's not just that we were doing a bad job with, say, training the Afghan army before, now we're doing a better job. Once you're doing it in year 10, you're actually doing some harm because you're trying to create an Afghan government in an atmosphere in which they're used to 10 years of American presence. They're used to 10 years of international presence. And frankly, every month that goes by and we dump another $5 billion into the Afghan economy and all of its corruption and ineffectiveness, seems like we do a lot of harm just by staying, that maybe the clock has just run out.
Well, I don't think so. I think the Afghan people, first of all, just a pedantic point, it's really not 10 years. It's really like a little more than 8. And secondly, a lot of that time was in a wholly different atmosphere. The resurgence of the Taliban really began about 5 years ago, and it was completely neglected by Washington. And that's why we find ourselves in that position. But to go to your core point, I don't see evidence that people are turning away from the international presence The polling data does not support that either. The feelings of desire that the international coalition in the U.S. remain quite high. But the people want several things which they're very clear on. They want a system of government that is just, and so corruption becomes a huge issue, and we focused on that. And President Karzai's agreed, and he's upgraded the Office Against Corruption in the government. They want to feel this is not a war without end, just like Americans. Hence the enormously important addition of the reintegration and reconciliation programs. They want to feel that they will get their lives back, and that means emphasizing agriculture. It's an agricultural country that used to export ag products until the Soviet invasion in 1978, and we need to help restore agriculture. We made agriculture the top non-security priority in this administration. In the previous administration, they were spending more money destroying poppy crops than agriculture. You saw that yourself when you were down in the South, how we're not going after the poor poppy farmers anymore. We're going after the big drug lords and interdictions. So we have to make all these changes. The people see these changes, and but we also have to produce the most critical issue, which is security. And security is the key.
When I was in Kandahar, I saw all of these police checkpoints being set up around the Kandahar city, police substations within the city, obviously the military operations around there, all this work being done on law and order and security. But what happens when those police arrest people? Right now, Kandahar has on the books authorization for something like 87 judges. They've only got 9 judges actually working. So you've got this security thing happening.
And they're way underpaid.
And they're way underpaid, and they're in danger. So you've got the security thing happening, but you don't have civilian government coming in behind it. And so if you're a Kandahari civilian who's got some dispute that you want resolved, a land dispute, livestock or something, the Taliban is frankly offering a much better service. They have a reputation for less corruption, and there isn't the kind of weight that you have in a whole province of 1 million people with 9 judges.
Although the third form of justice can be pretty brutal.
Yeah. But if I wanted to get something resolved, would I want to go to the Afghan government? Not there. It's hard to imagine that getting better over the course of the next year.
And that's why one of the most important programs we have, and one of the most difficult, is the rule of law program. I say it's difficult because there are many different types of law in Afghanistan. Traditional law, modern law, Sharia law, which can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, and this brutal but swift justice system of the Taliban you described. And we're all mindful of the fact that the Taliban used this issue you've just described as their path to power in 1992 to 95. So we've invested a lot of money in this. And again, there isn't much to show for the money that was invested prior to last year. Yeah. And so this program is under intense scrutiny, and we've significantly revamped it. You
famously started your diplomatic career during the Vietnam era, but we tried to do counterinsurgency in Vietnam too, pretty explicitly. I mean, we even called it that, and we don't think about that war that way when we look back at it. But when you look back at those efforts all those years ago, do you really have confidence that a foreign country can help create a state somewhere else, that we really can stand up an Afghan government? Obviously, we can create security and hope that they fill in that room with their own interest in governance, but can we really help build a government there?
I think we can if we do it right, and I hope we've learned some lessons since Vietnam, which is now a long way in the past, and it ended, after all, 35 years ago this year. But there are some obvious structural similarities, but there is a fundamental difference. And the fundamental difference is the one you and I just have already mentioned. It matters to our homeland security. Vietnam did not, although at the time the administrations in power did say it did, but they were wrong. Now, to your core point, we need to be always mindful of the fact that we are there to help the Afghans take over their own government, take over responsibility. We are not there to replace the Afghans. That's difficult in a situation like the one you just described with judges in Kandahar. That's a perfect example of the problem. We're not going to replace the judges, but we have to give them the support to get those judges trained, paid, with facilities. A lot of these judges, you mentioned, don't even have phones. They have no protection. They're very vulnerable. It's a process which is not easy, and you only embark on it if you decide that it is absolutely critical of the U.S. national interest, which it is.
When we come back, Richard Holbrooke tells me what he really thinks about American journalists